The last 2 weeks, we've talked about why riders run wide in corners and what to do if you actually are running wide in the corner. Well, this week on MCrider, we'll look at a more advanced rider solution to running wide in the corners. Hey, my name's Kevin, and I'm an MSF and Total Control trained rider coach, and I release a weekly video here on MCrider focused on road skills or road strategy to help you become a better rider. Become a member of MCrider, you'll get access to the forums and the field guide with even more tools to help you stay sharp and develop your skills on two wheels. Now, if you've not seen the two previous videos on MCrider, I encourage you to go back and watch those first for some more context on what we're going to talk about here today. But basically, we discussed riders running wide in corners and what to do if you're actually running wide. That advice I still stand by, and it works for all riders regardless of skill level. I think that every rider should begin riding with that technique that's taught by the MSF, that slow look, press, and roll technique for cornering. Basically, slow look, press, and roll says that as you're approaching a corner, you're going to slow down with the front and rear brakes before the corner. You're going to look in the direction of the turn, and then you're going to press on the hand grip or push on the hand grip on the side, the handlebars on the side of the intended turn, and then roll on the throttle. So I'm rolling on, or I've got maintenance throttle throughout that corner to get through the corner. I rode a lot of years using nothing but slow look, press, and roll. It works. As long as you don't misread the corner or need to emergency brake in a corner, it's a very viable solution for all riders, but especially new riders who haven't developed good brake and throttle control yet. I do think there is a better option for more advanced riders, though, and my advice to new riders, though, is that you should develop the basics first, that slow look, press, and roll. That's one of the fundamental skills, in my opinion, that every rider should develop first. Now, differentiating between an advanced rider and a new rider can kind of be tricky, especially when you're in my position giving advice online like MCrider does. So how do we define what a new rider is as opposed to an advanced rider? Well, there are a few ways that you can define it, but none of them are totally perfect. If I say, like I have in the past, that a new rider is someone with 3 years of riding experience, well, what if that rider's only got a few hundred miles every year? If you say someone that's less than 10,000 miles is a new rider, well, what if they have horrible habits and they've ridden 15,000 miles using really bad technique? But there's another really bad practice that many riders fall into, and that's grossly overrating their skill as a rider. So early on in my coaching experience with new riders, I had a class with, maybe 5 or 6 students in it. We went around the room the first day of class and we introduced ourselves. All but one rider stated that they were brand new. However, one rider told about riding across the U.S. I think he had done it more than one time on his motorcycle. He talked about a road trip down into South America, and he'd been riding for over 20 years, and that he was just taking this MSF class so that he could get the insurance break on his motorcycle insurance. Well, I had no reason to doubt that he had actually been on the trips that he described, and I actually made a mental note, being a new coach, that I may not have to watch this guy as closely once we got out on the motorcycles out on the range. Well, that was one of my first mistakes in that weekend of teaching that class, because later on that day we left the classroom, and within about the third or fourth exercise, Mr. World Traveler began struggling on the motorcycle. Now, he could use the clutch and the throttle. He could get the motorcycle going. He could ride it in a straight line with no problems. He had obviously ridden before, but if you asked the guy to weave between some cones or to control the motorcycle with slow speed, he was actually one of the worst in the class, even comparing him to these brand new riders. This guy had so many bad habits that he was a disaster when he was in that controlled environment of an MSF range. Now, he ended up passing the class, but I'm sure he left the weekend as a humbled man. Or maybe not. Maybe I misread him again, and he left thinking, man, I totally aced that class. So you just never know. And I learned as an instructor, and I saw it numerous times after that that riders will often overvalue their own ability at riding a motorcycle. That's why training classes are so valuable, and training exercises like those found in the field guide are valuable, because we might lie about our own riding abilities, but the cones never lie. So I say all of that to say this: I believe that the technique of trail braking is best left to an experienced rider who has developed good brake and throttle control. And as faulty as it may be, I'm going to leave that up to you to determine whether or not you're an experienced rider or a new rider. Because I don't know, but the cones know. So take an advanced class and give yourself an honest evaluation of your riding skills by letting somebody evaluate it. Or at the least, get in that field guide. And if you can't perform all of the exercises in the field guide, then you're probably a new rider and you've got some growth to do before you practice this technique we're going to talk about today. So what is this magic bullet for advanced riders that makes cornering safer? Well, we've discussed it here on the channel before. It's called trail braking. And trail braking, by definition, is driving and a motorcycle riding technique where the brakes are used beyond the entrance of the turn or the turn-in. So you're gradually releasing or you're trailing off that brake as the rider progresses through the turn. So they got the brakes applied, they've still got the brakes applied, they're leaning into that corner, they're still using some brake, but they're trailing off or they're slowly releasing that brake. Depending on the number of factors like the sharpness of the corner, the experience of the rider, road conditions, then the amount that you trail off or where you trail off on that corner will depend. Different for every corner, it's going to be different for the rider. This technique requires good brake control, so using too much brakes and it can cause problems. Being choppy on the brakes can cause problems. Coming in too fast into this corner or any other corner with this or any other technique can be a problem as well. So why do I think it's a better technique for cornering for advanced riders? Because it puts the rider and especially the motorcycle in a better position to handle what I call the what-ifs of riding. Let's say a rider who is not using trail braking enters a corner and there's something in their lane that wasn't apparent at turn-in. Using that slow look, press, and roll technique, the rider's back on the throttle, right? They've slowed down, they're looking, they're pressing, they're rolling on the throttle, using maintenance throttle or slightly accelerating. That requires that the rider's using the techniques to really be on their game looking through that corner and not riding above their ability to get that motorcycle to a stop in the distance that they can clearly see up the road. Because if they're back on the throttle, right, they're on the throttle, the forks are extended. The weight of the motorcycle goes to the rear, so the weight is rear biased and a lot of weight has to shift forward before that rider can get back on the brakes. Not to mention that if the rider's leaned over, that this uses some of their available traction as well. A rider who's using trail braking to enter that same corner already has pressure on the brakes, right? So they've got a little bit of pressure on those brakes. The front forks are still compressed, so it's providing more traction to the tires, and they can go to the brakes without upsetting the balance of the motorcycle as much. That forward weight shift headed into the corner is a huge benefit to that rider if they need to stop in the corner. It gives that front tire more traction because there's more weight being applied to the front, and that's when you really need that traction is at turn-in. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about trail braking, so let's address a few of those. You hear a lot of riders say that trail braking is strictly for the track. Well, it is true that trail braking can allow a rider on the track to enter a corner at a higher rate of speed, so that's where it's used at mostly on the track. But that's not what we're using it for on the street. I don't enter a corner much faster at all when using trail braking on the street than I do using slow look, press, and roll. The trail braking just puts the motorcycle in a better balance to be prepared for those what-ifs. So on the street, it's not about being faster, it's about being safer, and you need to separate talk about trail braking on the track from trail braking on the street because it's used for two different purposes. There's also confusion about how much pressure that you would use on the brakes at lean in. Because our goal is not to get into the corner faster, I'm still doing almost all of my slowing down prior to the corner, just like I would be using slow look, press, and roll technique. I'm just maintaining a little bit of front brake pressure to keep those front forks compressed into the corner and about to the apex of the corner. In reality, it doesn't really take much pressure. So one way that you can start to experiment with this is go out and get on your motorcycle in the garage, reach over and squeeze in that front brake. As you start to squeeze that brake in, you'll hear a click. And that click is the switch that would activate your taillight under normal riding conditions. That's also the point where the calipers begin to clamp a little bit on the rotor. So if you can squeeze that front brake in and roll the motorcycle back and forth with your feet with the motorcycle in neutral, and yet feel a little bit of resistance from that front brake, that's all the pressure that we're talking about to use in trail braking when you go into that corner, is you're just maintaining a little bit of pressure, just enough to light that rear tail light up as you go into the corner. So that's one way that you can practice trail braking in your garage and get a feel for that front brake pressure, to use that out on the street so that you're not over braking going into the corner. Now, I've given a very brief overview of trail braking in this video. If this is something that you're ready to explore in your riding, or you just want to know more on the subject, you can go to mcrider.com/TB, so TB for trail brake, and I have a whole selection of videos that go into much more detail on this subject. If you're an advanced rider, this is a really good tool to have in your tool belt. So while we're talking about that, the thing is, if you're considering making the switch to trail braking, you'll need to decide at some point to fully switch to trail braking, in my opinion. The reason is you never know which corner is going to be the problem corner, and it's going to have that what if in it. And once you recognize there's an issue, if you're not trail braking already at that point, it's too late. So I've developed, the habit of using trail braking all the time, and now every corner that I enter into at road speed, I'm trail braking at least part of the way through that corner, and that keeps that motorcycle in a much safer position if I need to brake or move out of the way for one of those what ifs. So advanced riders should enter every corner with all the tools available at your disposal to stay upright, and I believe trail braking is one of those tools. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. We'll be discussing this on the forums. You can become a member at mcrider.com/member. You'll get access to the forums, the field guide. You can even do ad-free videos and separate the influence of big tech from your MC Rider watching experience. You can get free MC Rider decals and more as a paid member of MC Rider. Go to mcrider.com/member for details. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MC Rider, and I'll see you on the road.